Tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you just told them. My problem is not ever, and never will be, finding stories to tell. It will be finding the time to tell all these stories that deserve such a huge audience. This is where you and I have to end up, right? People have to look at Robin and they have to look at Philip and they have to say, if I'm going to give them my time, I'm going to get a story that's worth hearing out of this. It's going to be presented to me in a way that's going to take my breath away. I'm going to walk away from this. I'm going to remember it. This is why journalism and filmmaking and art and culture are important, right? Because storytelling is one of our oldest human characteristics, and it forms us and it shapes us in ways that we don't even realize. How perfect is the enemy of good, you know?
Philip is the best storyteller that I know. We've been working together and we've been friends for about 20 years now. So I wanted to bring him into the studio here and have a chat about storytelling, his life, his Irish heritage, and how that has impacted his storytelling. He talks a lot and I try to get a word in once in a while, but now let's release the handbrake and let him loose. Here we go. Today's guest is very used to sitting on this side. Philip O'Connor, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm also not used to sitting on this side, so this is going to be interesting.
Yes, but this is your good ear, so that's why you're on this side. Exactly. How would you do this intro?
I think first of all, we need to tell people what they're going to be seeing here, right? So what we've talked about behind the scenes is we've talked about storytelling, and we've talked about how there's no such thing as an ordinary person. And if you just look around it, so maybe it might go something like, today on this video, we're going to talk about people, because everybody has a story to tell. But the question is, how do you get it out of them in the best possible way, in the best possible format, that's the most engaging format possible for the audience?
Exactly. That was what I planned to say.
Nothing like what I planned to say, but there you go. But sometimes you get caught up in the moment.
Exactly, and that's what happens when you're used to doing this.
Yeah. Now, I kind of repeated myself a little bit there, so if I was to script that, I would do it again, but we only ever do one take on this.
Yeah, but I will do one more take. The thing that there is no such thing as an ordinary person. What do you have to say about that?
I think that's absolutely fundamental in everything that we've been trying to do over the last God knows how many years that we've worked together, making films and presenting sporting events, and when you were in the live streaming business. And we were always trying to get to what the core of that is, what the essence of that thing is. And it is the fact that there's no such thing as an ordinary person. If you stop anybody on the street outside this studio...
If you dig far enough, there's always a story to tell.
And you don't even have to dig that far. Usually after a couple of seconds, they'll tell you something, you go, okay, I want to hear more about that.
Yeah. You're pretty used to sitting on this side of the camera. I'm not yet. I'm working on it. You have a little bit more experience of that, and we'll get to that. But first, let's do some backstory. Sure. We've known each other for a pretty long time now. Can you... I would say, I don't remember what year it was, but...
It was in April of 2002. So we were working together for a big news agency, and I was doing an IT course at the time, and you were working in their IT department, and I needed work experience. And I had this big long list of places that I was going to ask for work experience. And this big global news agency was at the very bottom of it, because I thought, there's no way they're going to say yes. So I made my way all the way down. Everybody else said no, and I got down to the very bottom of the list, and they said yes. And I came in there the first day on a Tuesday in April, and we've known each other ever since.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, we did things like, resetting passwords and fixing computers and that kind of thing. And we went on from there to producing some of the wildest live television I've ever been involved in.
It's a crazy story. So we had our 20-year anniversary last year.
That's right, yeah.
I think this video needs to summarize what we've done so far, and then we'll take it from there. So who are you, and how did you end up here?
Okay, so my name is Philip O'Connor. I am from Dublin in Ireland originally. I've lived in Stockholm in Sweden since 1999. I went out on a Sunday night for a few beers with a friend of mine because he had no money. And he said, okay, there's going to be all these girls, all these au pairs, and they're going to be drinking in this bar because one of them's going home. Let's go. And I went, I don't want to go. And he said, well, I've no money, so you have to bring me in and buy me some beers. And I did, and he met a lovely French girl, and they went out together for a couple of years, and I met a Swedish girl, and I married her many years later, and she's still my wife. But after a couple of years, she went, oh, let's try living in Sweden for a year or two. And I went, okay, because that's how they reel you in, you're like a fish on a hook, they just bring you in that way. And so I came over here to Sweden, and I thought it was going to be really, really easy, because if we go back even further, I always wanted to be involved in journalism, and I wrote for magazines and I wrote for newspapers, but I never wanted to call myself a journalist because I didn't have the education, I didn't have the qualification, didn't even have the self-confidence to call myself that. And I thought moving over to Sweden would be easy for me in one way because A, everybody speaks better English than what I do, but also because there seemed to be loads of opportunities here at the time. What I didn't realise was that you would need to speak the language, and also you would have to have a certain amount of formal education. And the funny thing about formal education in Sweden is it's only important until you get it. And then after that, once you're in the door somewhere, nobody cares, right? It's all about what you can do.
You need to have it on paper, that's it.
Yeah, well, you only need that to open the door. The paper is your key to opening the door to getting the opportunity. But it's what you do with your first and your second and your third opportunity that becomes who you are then.
We were sitting there doing IT at this news agency, and then we both kind of moved on at the same time. I went into video production, and you went more into marketing at the same place before venturing out on your own as well. What happened next?
Yeah, so I suppose the big strength that I always had in terms of storytelling was writing or speaking. I can put things into words that maybe other people struggle to do, and I can do it quicker, and I can do it in a way that provokes images in your mind, right? I never came into this news agency with the idea that I'm going to work here in IT for the rest of my life. My idea coming in there was I'm going to work with IT for the shortest time possible until hopefully they discover something in me and try to help me bring that out of me. The first opportunity I got to do that was, I don't know if you remember, I started writing newsletters, and it was all to do with, IT security and what to do when you're going on vacation and how you should organise files and that. And then all of a sudden people around us started to think, hey, this guy can write a little bit. So I was trying to be a little bit modest as well and think, could I really do this? And then I started to get the opportunity, but the opportunity wasn't on the news side, which is what I was really interested in, news and sports. It was on the marketing side. But I figured, hey, if I just take this chance, let's take this ball and run with it and see where it gets me to. You had to have some sort of a visual talent as well. You had to know what looked good, what pictures looked good. And at the same time then, that was where we sort of separated for a little bit, because you had gone off into the video world and really gone to learning the nuts and bolts of video production and how to make, this fabulous environment that we're in now. But we were still doing the same thing. We were looking for, we were on two different pathways towards doing the same thing, which I have always found fascinating.
It's really fascinating. And then you started your own business.
Yep.
A couple of years into that.
Yep.
And you started doing journalism for real.
Yes.
How did that feel?
That was pretty cool, because once the door was open and you realised that there might be an opportunity here, I've never seen a halfway open door that I haven't wanted to kick in, right? And I went, okay, when this opportunity came up, there was a chap who used to cover sports from the Stockholm office. He was leaving because he got a better job somewhere else. And they said to me, would you be interested in doing this? But it wasn't like an employed, full-time, permanent, pensionable job. It was a freelance job. And I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I was going, okay, you want me to write about sports? I've always loved sports. Okay, well, I just have to do it. So you remember that sort of thing of, shit, am I going to be able to pay the rent? Am I going to be able to do all these things? I remember thinking, if I don't do this, I'll regret it for the rest of my life.
I have a similar story, actually, because I worked at this event agency.
Yeah.
And the financial crisis hit in 2008.
Yeah.
I managed to stay on the first round of them firing people, but then on the second round they came and they said, we're going to have to let you go, but we really want you around, so we can offer you this 50% freelance contract.
Super.
The pay really sucked.
Yeah.
But I was like, yes, because this is what I've always wanted.
Yeah.
So this is the ticket out into this new world.
Actually a blessing, right?
Yeah.
I didn't want to be employed anywhere. I wanted to have the freedom to go and do...
Same here. It was what I always wanted, but I never had the guts to do it without any kind of security.
Yeah.
So this salary, 50% freelance contract was all I needed to just take the leap.
And once you have that, I suppose, for anybody watching this who has their own business, they'll be thinking, okay, what's my core business? How do I pay the rent and the salaries and the water and the electricity every month? And then what you do outside of that, that's what what you're really passionate about or whatever. And we're really lucky in that now our sort of core business, what we do is something that we're both really passionate about. You love the films that you make. I love the events that I get to cover as a journalist. And if you have that, then you're blessed. But sometimes you just need that little thing, that little spark that will get you through the door and get you going then. And then it's a case of and it really is a grind. You've just got to keep going and keep going and keep going and pitching and pitching and pitching and doing stuff, just to make sure that you get to where you want to go.
If you stay true to your passion, things will come to you. And you keep doing good things, and you will automatically make decisions that takes you in the right direction. I've been struggling so hard with finding out what I truly want.
Yeah.
It was just a couple of months ago that I realized that, okay, this is what I want to do. After 15 years of doing films for clients, I realized maybe I want to make films for my own, for myself.
For the things that you enjoy doing.
And then I okay, so I'm going to do this YouTube thing for 1 year on as a side hustle, 50-50%.
Yeah.
Something like that. And see what happens. And it's and the amount of energy that gives me and just all the ideas just come to me.
It's also
crazy.
a result of all the other decisions that you've ever taken, right?
Yes.
From leaving the news agency to getting involved in film to saying yes to that 50% of that, because it's a process of evolution. And the more you learn about it, fundamentally, what we've always come back to has been storytelling. It has been what's happening and how can we communicate this to the world, right? And we've become so much better at doing that than what we were in the beginning. But because what we're doing fundamentally is so pure and so simple, the only thing that's different about it is how you're telling it, who you're telling it to, and who you're telling it for, right? So the change that you've made now, you know, me looking at you from the outside now as a friend who's known you for more than 20 years, is you're now telling stories not for clients or not for anybody else, but for yourself. And that's a big difference because it's like a tilt shift. It changes the perspective of absolutely everything. I started to do the same thing without realizing it in about 2013. I started looking at what, you know, globally what we look at in terms of sports, and I realised how underrepresented certain people, in particular women, were. And I started to look at that. And it's never been a cash cow. It's never been something that I made a whole lot of money out of. But man, do I ever enjoy doing it. And every time you do something, even if you come home plus minus zero, no profit made, it doesn't matter. Because the sense of satisfaction you get out of doing something that you're passionate about, and I think that you can always see that in the work. I think you can see that in the things that I write and the things I talk about and in the films that you make as well.
I think so too. And the reason you're here today is because you have a new project going on where you do podcasts.
Yes.
And let's talk a little bit about that, because that leads us into today's actual subject.
Yes. So the first podcast I started is called Our Man in Stockholm. Our Man in Stockholm is a sort of a reference to being a foreign correspondent for the world kind of thing. And it worked really well, and people in the UK and Ireland know who I am through that. But that wasn't enough. So talking about media and journalism and things that happen doesn't excite people. After the pandemic, I really should have done it before the pandemic or during the pandemic, but sort of halfway through the pandemic, I realised that I'm an Irish person here in Sweden. There's 3,500 people who've all pretty much lost contact with each other. What can I do about that? I can start a podcast for them called Irish in Sweden. That was the start of it. And then I went, you idiot. There's like 3,500 Irish people in Sweden. This is never going to fly, right? But there's 70 million Irish people around the globe. Okay, 70 million O'Connors and Murphys and O'Haras.
How many people live in Ireland?
About 6 million on the island in total, right?
70 million outside of it.
Exactly. So you have 70 million people who can trace their roots back to Ireland, right? So in Philadelphia, in Australia, in New Zealand, in South Africa, in South America, everywhere you go, the first thing you'll see is an Irish bar. You know, there's so many people around the world. And some of them have been there for generations. You know, there are Irish people in America who've never set foot in Ireland, but yet they feel a very strong bond to it. So all of these stories, this is what brings me back to the point where I started. When I started to do that podcast called The Global Gale, I started with the idea that there's no such thing as an ordinary Irish person abroad. And then I realised, there's no such thing as an ordinary person at all.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
The moment you sit down and you talk to somebody and you're open to hearing what they have to say and their story, you'll realise that everybody has a unique story. And even the people who go, no, I'm not interested, they are. Because everybody has come from somewhere. Everybody has loved someone or been loved by someone or done something in their lives that just makes them remarkable. And that to me was kind of like when you decided that you were going to tell stories that you were passionate about. When I realised that, I was going, hey, there's an endless amount of things that I can do here just using this way of seeing things.
Yes, it's all about shifting the lens that you're looking at the world through. And I think this way of finding it, you have a niche audience of 70 million people or 76 million people, basically, and from all over the globe, which allows you to travel anywhere. Anywhere you go, you can find an Irish person who is there and who's not going to be ordinary in any way.
This is it.
Give me the best story so far.
So I was going down to the World Cup in Qatar, okay? Very problematic World Cup, okay? You know, fantastic country, extremely wealthy. There's also extreme poverty there. And I said, okay, I don't want to arrive there, somebody who doesn't know the language, doesn't know the lie of the land, doesn't know, you know, one metro stop from another. So I'll find an Irish guy over there. So there's an Irish guy called Faraway Martin, okay? That's his artist name, Martin Farahar. He's a musician over there. He has had hits on the Qatari charts with music that he's made over there. Because if you can, you know, spend 5 minutes on Instagram and find Faraway Martin. And not just one, he had 10 or 15 or 20 different stories to tell me, as well as putting the whole World Cup in the perspective of somebody living there, right? And that's just one tiny thing. And every week you get up, you start looking at the podcast. The Global Gale comes out on a Saturday. The Irish and Sweden podcast comes out on Monday morning at 7 o'clock. And every week you start the same thing, going, who am I going to interview? And you know what? It's never been a problem. And even if somebody says, oh, I'm sick or I can't do it, you'll find somebody else in minutes.
This perspective of that there's no such thing as an ordinary person, that really launched this idea in my head to get you here and talk this through. It clicked in my head too, because it really rhymes with what I'm doing. I'm really looking for super passionate people. But I think every person is really passionate about something.
Yep.
You just have to get it out to them, and that's sometimes it's more difficult than other times.
Yeah, and it's not always obvious, right? So in certain places you might find somebody who is so humble that they don't speak about what it is they've done in their past. And I mean, there's people who've been professional athletes. There's a guy who lives in Skarpnæk, an Irish guy who lives in Skarpnæk, who was in a Neil Jordan film back in the day. Neil Jordan made The Crying Game and sundry other films, that kind of thing. The guy never mentions it. I think the last I knew, I went to school with him in Dublin, and the last I heard of him, he was, I think he was working in the kitchen of a daycare centre or something like that. And here's a guy who has been on the red carpet in Hollywood, more or less, and been part of this film, and now he just does seemingly normal things all the time. And all of those stories are out there. Not everybody wants to tell them as well. So there's a way of approaching these things that I find. The first thing that I find that you have to do is you have to be humble, right? So if you start to tell me about your passion for making movies, right? I shouldn't be coming in and saying, oh yeah, I'm like that too, right? So no, let you tell me, okay? What, form what I feel after that. What I think about any of these things is in no way important, right? What we want to hear from is your passion for it, what you see about it. And putting those things into, and letting you tell your own story. People have been telling this story about themselves for so many years that eventually, they have a way of doing it. So let them do that first.
And sometimes you have to shift their perspective to make them tell a different story, because they've fed their own story to themselves so many times, and it's not the story they should tell, because there's usually so much better story behind them somewhere, hiding a little bit, and then you see little shiny lights coming through sometimes, and it's like, what's that? Let's grab that and let's elaborate on that. It's like going fishing.
Yeah. So the first thing is identifying what the story is that they have to tell, right? Yeah. And the second, and this word sounds really harsh, interrogate that story, right? Yeah, exactly. Hold it up to the light and let's have a look through this. Let's see what light shines through that, right? And I find that the most important part of illuminating that is to talk about feelings, right? And other people's perspectives. Journalism schools and media and communications and science and all that, this is not, art, what we do. It's basically, it's a handiwork. It's a craft that you're putting together. And I remember being at the Beijing Olympics in the freezing cold, and I got one day to go up to the freestyle skiing, and there was a famous American-Chinese skier called Eileen Gu who took part, and she was a phenomenon on TikTok and Instagram and everywhere. Everybody wanted to know about this girl. When you have somebody who's that globally famous, right? They're so used to telling their own story.
Exactly.
You have to chip away at it a little bit. When you're covering all these different events, some people have been there, they've been seeing the same girl for 5 or 6 days in a row, right? And the questions run out. So I just come up here fresh, and I had come up there with an idea, because Eileen was born in America. Her mother was Chinese, her grandmother was Chinese, and I'd heard her speak a little bit about her family situation and that, and she could have competed for the United States of America, but she chose to compete for China because the Olympics was there. And I'm in the mix zone, everybody's telling her, tell us about your run. She'd been in the half pipe that day and she'd done some fantastic tricks. And then, we're all standing around, all the agency news reporters, we're all standing around. So, this guy takes his turn and this girl takes her turn. And then all of a sudden everybody looks at me and goes, okay, it's your turn to ask a couple of questions. And I said, Eileen, I believe your grandmother is flying in today to watch you compete in the half-pipe finals. And she goes, yeah, that's cool. That was in the news and everything else. I said, is there anything you can do to impress her? And she stopped. Yeah. And she had no answer. But the answer that eventually came was, I don't know. But that was the story. The story was that Eileen Gu has won the hearts of the world, but she still has one person left to convince, and that's her own grandmother. And in that, Robin, is her whole story. It's the whole story of being an immigrant, of being the child of immigrants in America. It's trying to live in two cultures where success is gold medals, and it's garlands, and it's prizes, and it's sponsors, but it's also the approval of your grandmother. And I walked away from there thinking, and the rest of the reporters are going, this guy's lost it completely. But when we went away, we wrote the article afterwards, it was completely obvious where that was going to end up. And that to me was letting her tell her story, but it was interrogating that story. So instead of saying, oh, your grandmother must be so proud of you, it was asking her, what could you do that would impress her? So by making her look at her own story in that way, she came up with a whole new perspective on what it was that she was competing for. My problem is not ever and never will be finding stories to tell. It will be finding the time to tell all these stories that deserve such a huge audience.
So, I just want to take a quick break, breathe for a while, and rest the ears, and let you know that the next film that we've been working on since April is now finished. We have finally completed it.
I don't like to give the customer what they ordered.
It's been so much work, and we also reached a huge milestone because we got a sponsor for this film, which is the first actual income that I'm making on this channel. This is so immensely important to be able to keep doing this thing that I do love to do. Can't wait to share this film with you. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. Now, back to Philip.
What we do, and I don't want to sound pretentious here, right? But what we do is important. This is why journalism and filmmaking and art and culture are important, right? Because storytelling is one of our oldest human characteristics. And it forms us and it shapes us in ways that we don't even realise. We had a tradition of storytelling in Ireland, and it's in no way unique because these things can be found all over the world. But in Ireland we had travelling storytellers, and a travelling storyteller in Irish is called a shanachie, all right? And he would turn up in a town, he would turn up in a home, or he would turn up in a pub, but usually in a home. And he would tell stories for the evening. And he would be fed, and he'd be given something to drink, and he'd be given a bed to sleep in, and he might be given a little bit of cash as well when he left the next morning to go on to the next village.
Old world news.
Exactly, right? And he would bring news from the last town that he'd been in and this kind of thing. But of course there was embellishment and there was drama and there was all sorts of things put in there as well. But your success as a shanachie, if you just come in and you just tell boring stories, nobody's going to want to listen to you. And word will get around that, oh, you know, if this guy Thomas shows up at your door, don't bother with him, he's useless, you know? So it's knowledge passed on by mouth, from mouth to ear, right? And this is all, nothing was ever written down. All these stories, all these myths, all these legends, all these histories. And you know what happens when this happens? The battle becomes bigger, the warrior becomes braver, the victory becomes sweeter in all those things. And then when you go to Svalbard, or when you go to Bali, or when you go to wherever it is your next story takes you to, you have to have the time to immerse yourself in that and to look at it and to pick it up and to turn it over and to see where the light gets in, where the cracks are there, right? Part of that is research, but part of that is just being there. And, you know, everywhere you land, whether it be Tokyo or Toronto, you get into the rhythm of a place. You find out where the people go, like where the local people go, the bars that they drink in, the places that they eat. Do they go to work at 7 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock in the morning? Do they have a siesta like in Spain, or do they work 12 hours a day like in Doha? And when you find all those things and you settle into that rhythm and then you take your camera out, that's when you can really start to catch a story.
That's true. So back to you being Irish, because you've mentioned it a couple of times. But the Irish tradition of storytelling is kind of unique and kind of mythical around the world. It's like everybody knows that if you're in Ireland, there are stories just everywhere going around like clouds around people. And what do you think that comes from?
I think there's an enormous need for connection in Ireland, right? And there's a difference between how different cultures around the world handle this thing, right? So in Ireland, if you're driving along a sort of a country road in Ireland, people will just wave at you, you know, just as you're driving past, and they let you know that they've seen you, you know, that you exist. And I find that a beautiful thing. And if you go into a bar in Ireland, I know you've been to a few in Dublin and around the country yourself, if you go in and sit down, it literally takes minutes for somebody to ask you who you are, what you're doing there, and they'll get talking to you. And that whole thing of finding connections with people, and Irish people find connections with other Irish people and with people from beyond Ireland through storytelling. And if you see two Irish people meet anywhere in the world, you will see that instant connection. So, where are you from? What's your name? Oh, do you know this person? Oh, did you go to school here? Did you play for that team? Oh, do you know this guy who was a musician in your area? all those things, they'll immediately find something that they share. And then from that shared, that tiny little sliver of a shared past, they'll build something out of it. And that becomes their relationship then. And even the people that I know here in Stockholm, we have certain things that like certain sports things that we talk about all the time, certain musical things that we talk about all the time, certain things that we've done together, that we've done apart, or that we've become known for. And all our little relationships are built upon that. But storytelling is key to that, because storytelling is what defines who we are. And I think it's very important to us as well that these 70 million Irish people that are around the world, there is something that holds them all together, and it is that sense of Irishness. And everybody that you meet in Boston or in California or in South Africa, they'll all tell you where their people were from. Even if they've never visited it, they'll know that story. And those stories alone, some of those stories are very quiet. There's some tiny, tiny little details there. Some of them wind up with the fire ladders and the police officers of 9/11, you know. And all of these things have further strands, and the more you pull on one of them, the more stories tend to come out.
Yeah. The word story, you were the one who introduced me to the word story in the English language. Of course, I knew it as a word before, but the meaning of it.
I think it's the depth of the meaning of it, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think you introduced me to that word like 20 years ago when we first met, and you said in Ireland, you say, what's the story? Or just story.
Exactly, yeah.
You short it to story.
That's it. Like, there's actually a podcast by two guys in Dublin called What's the Story? And it's huge, award-winning podcast. And then you just shorten that down to our story. I was like, tell me something, entertain me here, share something with me. And there's so much in that one little word, and there's so much can be got out of it as well, because just saying that to you, our story. And then all of a sudden, you know, we could be sitting there for hours over a drink or on a bus ride to work or doing, you know, eating lunch on Kungsgatan.
It's like a request for story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a request for a story. But like all of those things, it's the start of an interaction there, right? You don't sort of sit at home in the morning over your cornflakes going, okay, when I see Robin at work today, I'm going to tell him about this, this, and this. That doesn't happen. It's an organic thing that starts in the moment between the two of us, and then that these things come out. And the thing that I find most amazing is that after over 20 years, we can still surprise each other, because there's still things that you've done that I don't know, and vice versa. And then when we start to tell those stories, and often I'll find that when we're working somewhere, and we've done some really long sports broadcasts and that kind of thing together, they're part of our shared story now. But in the middle of that, you'll start telling me about some live broadcast that you did, or I'll tell you about some race that I commentated on, or some place that I've been in the world. And all of those things then feed into the shared narrative that has been our past over the last 2 decades.
Yeah, it's a crazy long time.
If you look at me as somebody who's lived outside of Ireland for almost half their lives, right, and I now have children outside of Ireland, so their direct relationship to, you know, half, if you like, of their culture is through me. And that has to be through the stories that I tell. In a world that we live in now, where stories are coming at us all the time, right? But there's not a whole lot of calories in some of them, okay? We see them, they're gone. I can ask you in an hour's time what you just saw on TikTok and you can't remember, right? But the things that we truly remember are the things that have happened to people that we love, to places we respect, to places that we feel a connection to. And they're the stories that it's most important to tell properly, because we want them to live on. So we can look at it in terms of an hourglass, right? So down the bottom you might have, you know, the Instagram story or the TikTok that goes out and that, you know, in a day's time it's forgotten. Even in your own feed it's just dropped way down. But at the top of that we have to have the stories that take time to tell and that they take effort to tell, where you need to sit back and say, okay, I've got to do this, I've got to treat this properly, almost like a treasure, which is what it is. It's an artifact that you're passing forward, and to give it the time that's necessary to do that properly.
I heard Casey Neistat, he told this so beautifully. He said the top of the funnel has become so much bigger. Like when we were young, if you were going to make a film, a documentary or whatever, you needed to go find funding. The cameras cost like more than anyone could ever afford, and hiring a crew was really expensive, and very few people could do this. And maybe you saw like 10 films in a year that you really enjoyed. And that number hasn't changed. That number is still the same. You still see like maybe 10 films in a year that you really enjoy, or 10 stories that really stick with you. But the top of the funnel, the amount of people doing stuff, is just crazy bananas big, and that's billions of people having access to the creation every day now.
The tools and technology and all that.
So the funnel has grown at the top, but the bottom is still the same. And I think this is what you're getting at. Like we have to make the stuff that goes down to the bottom of the funnel that really sticks.
So it comes down to curating stories and then really delivering on stuff that's worth doing, right? The Eileen Gu story that we told a little bit earlier, it's about capturing a moment for a global superstar at one of the biggest events of her life and giving a little bit of a different twist, right? What do we want to do? How do we want to preserve these things? How do we want them to be remembered? It comes down to, like, because everything is so instantaneous, you can take your phone out of your pocket now and you can start filming something and it might go viral. There might be an accident. There might be, you know, something weird will happen. Somebody will slip in the street or whatever. And that's one thing. You know, I talk about it in written journalism. If all the calories are in the headline and nothing is in the text, nobody's ever going to remember it, right? So you really have to give people something. And we also have to build a trust with them. And this is where you and I have to end up, right? People have to look at Robin and they have to look at Philip and they have to say, if I'm going to give them my time, I'm going to get a story that's worth hearing out of this. It's going to be presented to me in a way that's going to take my breath away. I'm going to walk away from this. I'm going to remember it. This story that they're telling me is going to become part of my story because I can relate to that story.
And
I can
retell it.
Exactly. I can tell it to other people. I can pass it on. Not all the great stories I've ever told are my stories or things that I've seen or that, but they've been things that have been told to me in the past as well. One of them I'm going to use soon, and it's just one of these things that stuck with me for 40 years since I was told as a child. And soon is going to be the time to tell that story again. And I kind of know the situation that's going to be done in. And there's an enormous power in those things and an enormous responsibility in being the person that people come to for those things, in being the Shanachie who comes and knocks on the door and is welcome in as Robin, okay, what have you got for me now from Svalbard or from Bali? Or what story have you got that I need to hear? If the product or if the service or if the company or the organization happens to be part of it, happens to dovetail nicely with it, fantastic. Yeah. If it doesn't, you can't be using the shoehorn to get it in there and make their story something that it's not. And again, this is something that you've worked a lot more with this than what I have. You've been trying to get companies and organizations, all sorts of organizations, to tell you, okay, what is your story? What story are you trying to tell? And so often you're talking to people who just don't get it, you know, who need the
this
word
is our
story
quarterly report, and this is the way what it looks for future, blah, blah, blah,
yeah.
blah, blah.
Make me care.
Yeah,
Make me care. How will I be invested in this thing, right? And they are getting better at it. But at the end of the day, you know, there's so many people who, you know, they just want, you know, they have a particular outcome in mind. Oh, we want our share price to go up, or we want people to think that we're great. It's like, okay, how do you define that? How are you going to reach that? Oh, what would a good metric for that be? Well, when people think we're great.
And who are people?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like I was writing a thing this morning about a particular target audience, and it's almost like I love that thing of, you know, having a person in mind. So, you know, if I wanted to write something about filmmaking, I would have you in mind because you're the person that I want to engage with. I want you to look at that. I want to interact with you on those things, right? But if you just think of some nameless, faceless, shapeless being,
that's the biggest struggle I've had when working with B2B companies.
Yeah,
and they think of their target audience as a business, because a business can never be an audience because there are humans in the audience who are.
It's just a legal entity.
There are humans in the business who are your audience,
yeah.
and you have to talk to them, and they don't speak business; they speak human.
Yeah,
and that's so hard for some people to understand that you have to use common words. Same with politicians. Politicians are also humans. They don't like when people speak politician to them.
No, all this
because they don't care anymore.
Bureaucratic language and that
exactly.
kind of thing. When I sit down to make podcasts for the Irish community, I have a few people in mind, right? Kevin is a carpenter from Northern Ireland, and like a wonderful guy, loves Liverpool Football Club, likes to go out for a drink with the lads every couple of months and watch a game of soccer. He's married to a Swedish girl. They have 2 children. Brilliant bloke altogether. And I think of him getting into his van at 6 o'clock on a cold Monday morning. I think, I have to entertain this guy now. I have to form a connection with him instantly, right? And in doing that, you know, just having that one person in my head, I can form that connection with everybody who listens because nobody knows that I'm talking to him, you know?
Exactly, and you think of the pictures, you picture him in the van, it's cold, and he turns up the heat, and before the heat gets on in the car,
the Bluetooth is connecting and everything.
Exactly, and then your voice has to be the thing that comforts him.
That's the thing, you know.
When you do that in that kind of detail, it gets very clear what you need to do.
Yeah, and everything else just falls away. So like you've worked with me for many years, you know I don't use scripts very often. I'll often have one page to introduce whatever it is we're doing, and then after that we'll just make it up as we go along. And it's the same thing with podcasting. So for the global Irish community, that has to be slightly different because I don't personally know so many of the people who are listening to it, whereas I would do in Sweden. But I still have people in my mind that I'm thinking of. There's one guy in particular in New Zealand, and there's another girl who's an actress in Los Angeles. And I'm trying to think, okay, is this going to be something that's appealing to them and that's put forward in such a way that they'll understand it? Because essentially what you're doing with podcasting and also what you're doing with film is you're making it for one person. You're making it for the listener or the viewer, right? And if you make it with their perspective in mind, and that means, okay, providing all the context, all the background, providing all the emotion that you can, then you leave them to enjoy the experience, right? But if they have to sit there going, okay, he used that person's first name but not their surname, so I don't know who that is. And I can kind of place the accent, but I'm not really sure where they're from. Give them all that, right?
Yes.
In visual terms, give them the wide shot of Stockholm.
Way.
Yeah, in some way. Tell them that. Give them the information that they need. So the less that they have to consciously put the Lego together themselves, the more they can just sit back and enjoy whatever was built from it.
Know your audience.
Yeah, know your audience and write for that one person or those two people. All of us as creators, as creative people, we would like to make something that appeals to 1 billion people, and we'd like them all to give us just $1 so we can be billionaires, right?
It's so easy.
Yeah, exactly. so sign up right now. But you can't see, but that's not possible. So the things that I talk about at the moment, certainly on the podcast, are for an audience of 76 million people with the global scale. If I want to do anything different to that, then I have to look at a bigger global audience again. I would prefer one knock 'em dead strong connection.
I've been nerding down a lot in the rabbit hole of YouTube algorithms lately, and I think the metric you're looking for is the viewing time, the average viewer time. And see where people drop off, how long they stay. Yeah, because the way to make people stay watching something is by constantly feeding their emotions new food.
I don't want to do that in a cynical way, right? I want to do that in a way that everybody who interacts with me or with a story that I tell, I want them to go away feeling richer for the experience. Yes. I don't want them to kind of get, 75% of the way through a YouTube video that I put up and then they just get bored, right? I want it to be like that perfect Ramones pop song, 2 minutes of like, here you go, I gave you exactly what you wanted, you got a buzz out of that, and now you move on to the next thing.
Exactly, because there are a lot of YouTube videos that you can see, okay, this is written and produced just to keep people
bang on the algorithm.
Yeah, just to keep people watching.
Yeah.
And when it becomes too obvious, it gets in my face, and I feel, but I still want to know what they're gonna say. And it's like,
only last night I had to change the battery in the key for my car. And, so I was doing that. And of course you go to YouTube because that's where all knowledge is stored these days. And I'm going into that. And then they go, oh, today I'm going to tell you how to do this. And then they go into something else. And they go, okay, my patience are just about to run out. And then he comes in with, okay, so to do this, you're going to need these tools and that. You go, oh, great. So you go and get the tools. And then he goes off the point a little. And then they just bring you back in just in time. I want to find that little twist, that kind of thing that people aren't really expecting, to the point where, sometimes if you're writing a novel or whatever, you want people's jaw to be on the floor when this thing happens. Like, wow, like this is feasible, but I never saw that coming. Now, it's not always possible to do that. But I do find that in interview situations, sometimes when we're talking, or when you're talking to somebody for an interview and that kind of thing, they will say something, and I'll take that, I'll just put that in my back pocket, right? And that's for later. And then when it goes quiet a little bit later on, then you'll throw that in there. But in doing that then, you kind of get a very, very honest answer. So this again comes back to storytelling. It's not just giving people what they expect. It's giving people what they didn't expect, what they didn't know they even wanted, in a way that really excites them.
Find what you don't know you're looking for, kind of thing.
That's one of those things, especially with the way social media recommends stuff to us these days, that sometimes you'll come across things. I usually say that, music stopped for me the day my first child was born, so I'm kind of stuck somewhere in about 2004, and very little new music has broken through since then. But the way it does is that sometimes you'll just, hear a snippet of something on the radio or on TV, or you'll see something on YouTube, and you realize that, I didn't even realize that I liked that. I don't like romantic comedies. And then you sit down and you watch and you laugh your whole way through and you go, oh, well, I actually do, And it comes back to us as storytellers and as content creators of but when people trust you, they will go on a voyage of discovery with you, and they'll actually invest a lot in that, right? So somebody will sit down and watch the first half an hour of a film that's made by Robin Danehav just because it's beautiful and because they know what you've done before. And like, anytime you put up something on YouTube, I'm going to watch it because I know and I trust you to do things that I'm interested in, right? So there's a certain capital invested there in that, and I'm not going to disappear on you. I'm always going to watch these things until the end, you know? But in knowing that then, that also gives us a responsibility to make sure that we deliver. And the more that we can do that, not just on an intellectual level, but on an emotional level and almost on a spiritual level as well, building a sense of community around what you do, right? So it doesn't matter to me if, you know, 1 billion people don't like what I do. But if the few thousand or the few tens of thousands who listen to what I do and who read what I do, if they come back to me and say, I really enjoyed that, I really got something out of that. And all of those things to do with community and connection are so important. So I think we're all more willing to invest in that. And in that then we come back to this idea of story, because story is something that we all share. And that's why you and me building up trust and with the audiences that we have, and audiences are growing all the time, right? But it's to grow that trust and then to get people to realize that there's a monetary value to what we do, right? And there's an Irish podcaster, his artist name is Blind Boy Boat Club, right? But he has a hugely popular podcast and his Patreon is what he lives on. And he says, look, you know, for the price of a beer or a cup of coffee every month, you can ensure that I can keep doing this, right? And I think for most people in the West, when you think of it in those terms, it's actually very, very little. When we worked together at that news agency, I used to buy a newspaper on the way home every day, which was like, you know, €1, right? Yeah. So you may as well say 20 working days a month, that's €20 a month, right? This guy on his podcast has taken 5. But, you know, if we can get people to think that, okay, a physical product is not necessarily something, when we provide the service of the work we do, when somebody decides, okay, I'm going to give Robin €50 because he's going to go to Svalbard and show me things that I've never seen before in a context that I've never experienced, that has value too. So I'd love to see a situation where people would have, so, you know, 5 trusted creators and they give them their €5 every month. And I don't have to have the same 5 as you have. And indeed, I should probably consult with you. And if you're giving Robin €5, well, then maybe you can give Philip €5. And that's how this works out, so that we get to choose all this content. Now, you're depending on people then to make the intellectual decision and the emotional decision to say, I'm going to support this guy because he's a decent guy. I enjoy what he do. We're not quite there yet, but that is, like you say, it's the future.
I think that's where YouTube comes in and all these platforms where you can monetize with ads. Because that's also a way forward, I think, for this to be open and free and not be aligned to what some producer at some big news house says.
It wasn't just that we would get to do the things that we want to do, right? We want to be independent. Yeah. And it doesn't matter who's watching this. If they come in and they say, look, I'll give you a job and it's going to be 37 and a half hours a week and you're going to get a monthly salary and that kind of thing, you're not going to say yes to that. No. And I'm not going to say yes to that. Because with the freedom that we've had now over the last 10 or 15 years to do these things has been so fantastic that we're never going back to what we did before.
I was almost back there for a while running companies with employees and stuff. It was almost like an ordinary job again. When I got out of it, it was so nice. And
but this is it.
And the freedom, and I can just take the decision one day that, okay, I'm going to do YouTube this year for a year. And nobody's complaining about it. It's what I want to do, and then I can just do it.
And then there is that thing as well, that if you have to live and die by this, right, it's your decision. And, you know, you can always go back to, you know, I remember in the beginning when you'd sort of started up and live streaming was a big thing then, and not many people could do it. And you were the best guy in the whole country at doing it at that time. And you were very much in demand. And yet you still left that business behind you. You know, there's still loads of business there for you. You went, look, this doesn't satisfy me anymore. You were doing these great shows, but once you've done 10 or 15 or 20 of them, if you do 1 or 2 new ones, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference.
20,000.
Exactly, yeah, when you've done like 20,000 of them. But then you want to move on to the next thing. But again, now you're in a situation where it's only you that's affected. And you can always go back to these things, you know?
Exactly. And the biggest struggle I have right now, it comes down to storytelling, but in the split second where people see the thumbnail of my content on YouTube.
Yeah.
And how to make people click on that and then deliver on what I promise in that thumbnail and that headline that's on there. And this is a completely new shift for me that I'm really thinking and struggling with.
It's the $64,000 question, is the way they used to call it. It's like if you can solve that, then that's it. You know, you're going to be Jake Paul. You're going to be huge on YouTube forever. You know, and that's the hard thing. But there's 2 ways to do that. One is, how the algorithm delivers to people, right? And it's how, Spotify chooses what's going to be on my daily mix or what's going to be on Discover Weekly or that. And the same thing for the things that pop up in my YouTube and my thumbnails, when I'm just sort of watching on the couch in the evening, But the other way to do that, and that's the building of the trust, right? In that when somebody sends a link to your YouTube channel via WhatsApp to their mom, right? And say, okay, wait till you see the images he's taken, wait till you see the people he's talked to. And I do think that whereas there's a huge scale or a huge volume in what you're doing with the algorithm, that I think that there's a stronger bond often created when somebody refers refers your work to another person.
Of course, the problem is to get there.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have to super optimize every thumbnail to bring in maybe 2 more subscribers.
Yeah.
It's so much work for so little payout.
But
until you reach kind of the point where the scale is big enough so it starts to grow by itself and people are sending it on WhatsApp and stuff.
Well, if you want to talk about the Patreon thing, and this is where people pay you a certain amount a month, and then there's nothing, it feels like a punch in the stomach when somebody cancels their €5 a month. That's really awful. Because every subscriber you get in...
It's the most honest feedback you can ever...
It is literally, okay, you're crap. I am no longer willing to pay for whatever garbage it is you're putting out there, right? But every time you get somebody in there as well, like it's like war. Like it's like, the First World War in the trenches where you're clawing your way forward, one more person. And like everything else, there is a scale, there's a tipping point there. But I think there's a great Irish writer, Brendan Behan.
Sorry, can I just ask one question in there, in between? When you get a new Patreon, do you ever feel the imposter syndrome?
I think you always do. When you go to a venue and you're sitting there in the press box and you always think, only on the first day, that somebody's going to tap you on the shoulder and go, you don't belong here. And that's the thing that comes back, and that's what keeps me going. So wait, I'm going to show you how much I belong here. I'm going to knock this out of the park. But I think part of it is starting to believe in yourself, that when people pay me €5 a month for these 8+ podcasts or 12 podcasts that can go out in a month, it's very little money, right? But they're showing me that they care, that there's value in what I do, right? And that imposter syndrome is starting to get less and less and less, because you know what? What I do is actually really good. When I make those connections with people, they feel seen. They may not be able to speak back to me, but they feel like I hear them in some way, that they're part of the conversations. The way that I hope that people who are watching this now will feel just like a silent part of the conversation between you and me. And that to me is like, that's the iceberg of imposter syndrome is starting to melt for me a little bit. It's an enormous privilege for somebody to buy a book that I've written, or to sit down and listen to a podcast that I've made, or to ask me to interview somebody. And I'll never look on that and go, I'll never take that for granted in any way, because the most valuable thing that most people have is time. And if they'll spend their time listening to me, even more so than their money, it's worth so much to me. But that means then that I use that then to motivate myself to make sure that next week's podcast is going to be better than this week's, and the one after that is going to be better again. And any time I ever ask you for your attention or for your time, I'm going to deliver on that. And that has to drive all the stories that you're going to tell.
For me, the imposter syndrome is like 2 different pillars that's working against each other. Mm-hmm. It's the logical part of my brain says, I know what I'm doing, this is okay, it's going to be fine. The other one is the emotional one, which goes completely bananas, and it doesn't follow the logical one at all. So I can come to a set, I know I'm going to make this film with a client, and I can be so intensely nervous the day before. But I've done this so many times. So my logical brain says, I know exactly what I'm doing, it's going to be fine. But the emotional side is just going crazy.
Until you're there.
Yeah, until I'm there, and until I get back and I see the footage and I see that it cuts nicely, then I know, okay, this is good.
Well, I think part of that is preparation, right? So every time I'm going to do anything, like, and it could be travel, it could be, any of the big events and that. One of the great videos on your channel at the moment is about, okay, what should I bring when I go on my travels, right? That's me. That's my kitchen table every time I ever have to go anywhere. It's like, okay, what do I need to bring? What do I need to make sure that I have with me? And I beat myself up if I forget to bring a certain thing, or if I don't have something that I really need. But that's also part of the process, that preparation for me in learning about an interview subject, in packing the bag the right way, in bringing the right microphone or the right camera, or that's all part of a guarantee that this is going to be perfect. And live, you only get one take. You've got to say it, you've got to do it. You can't be stumbling over words, you can't be looking for statistics or getting things wrong. You've just got to be right on the money, bang, But it's the preparation that goes into that. Like, it's hard work making things look that easy. But that also comes from And hopefully now it's something a little lesson for you when you realise exactly how good you are. And one of the things that, as an independent creator, an independent storyteller, that we tend to be really bad at is giving ourselves credit for how good we actually are, right? Yes. You never sit down.
Sit down with yourself and have a little pep talk.
That's the thing. Like, I mean, we can look back on some of the sporting events we did, the Norseman Extreme Triathlon in Norway.
Vignette.
Good morning and welcome to Gaustablikk here in Norway, where we are all set to bring you the 2017 Norseman Extreme Triathlon, the ultimate triathlon here on the face of the earth. I'm sure she knows, she has to know, there can be no way she cannot know that Anne Neville is right on her trail.
We really helped make that a really visual sport and bring that to a huge audience back when we were broadcasting those things. The O'Connor.
Klockan är typ 10:05 och det tokregnar. Och det ska regna ännu mer sen. Så att vi kommer få en blöt dag idag. Det blir kul.
Good morning and welcome to Ötulö, the World Championship race in swim run. It is 13 minutes to 6 here in the morning and we are in for a fine day's racing. What we're not in for is a fine day.
And yet very seldom would you sit down and go, geez, man, we did that really well. Now, you know it, and I know it. But when you're looking for something, to hang your hat on, when you're looking for that little bit of confidence, somebody said to me recently, I was looking for a particular contract to do something. They're going, do you have a CV? I was going, no, I don't have a CV. Can you just list some of your achievements? And I was going,
which ones?
Yeah, because nothing sticks out. The fact that I'm alive at all and still in this business is an achievement. But then you think back and I've done this amount of World Cups and I've done this amount of Champions League games and I've done this and I've done that. And some of the stuff you even forget. I've had to do it on occasion where, say I'm going to a big soccer event and I'll have to Google, some soccer players and my name because I know I've interviewed them in the past. And then things pop up and I don't even remember being there or writing them. There's a real there's a very weak amount of, I was at that game and, wherever.
Some jobs do go on autopilot.
Yeah, well, some do. And you can't have a conscious memory of everything all the time because your head would just explode, right?
Exactly.
There's an expression in English, in fish and chip shops in England, they used to use yesterday's newspapers to wrap, and like we'd always say, we'd be wrapping tomorrow's fish and chips, because it gets forgotten about that quickly. But there are certain things that even in the moment there, when you read a newspaper, when you see, when you see something that's done by a client or when you see something that you broadcast yourself, and you look at that and you go, yeah, there was real quality to it, to what we did there. And it doesn't matter if it's disposable, but it's to try to maintain that quality the whole way through and give yourself credit for that.
Very often when you finish something, you look for, okay, what was not so great and what can we improve for the next time.
And those parts are always obvious as well.
Yeah, they're super obvious and you write them down, but you never write down the good part.
Yeah. Like, we'll remember certain things. I remember talking about waves one time at Ötulö.
Yeah,
it was one of those
classic.
clips, and it's just, everybody loves that clip.
But we can see how rough the water is there here in the Stockholm archipelago. If you look at the size of that wave.
I remember thinking that you don't want to talk over things. You want to share it, right? You want to to focus on certain things together. That was a positive thing that also turned out to be a thing that we could develop further in the storytelling that we did around racing at that time.
Look at the size of that wave.
Yeah, exactly. You still remember it.
Still in here.
And when we do all those things, though, it's really important because, like you say, we can often sit down in the car afterwards, or we can be taking down the cables and microphones and that. We say, oh yeah, this went wrong, that went wrong, and not go back over the great things that we have done. And I think in general, there's a great confidence to be had from that. But by looking back at what you did really well, you can also find things that you can further develop, is what I'm trying to say. And it's having that humility to say, yeah, that was really good, but it can always be better. But also not, you have to be fair with yourself as well, right? Because the conditions that we tend to work under, we almost never work in a studio situation, right? We're often out in nature, halfway up a mountain somewhere, or on the side of a road.
Today is actually a very controlled situation, except the fact that we don't have any crew.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually even easier to control.
So we're probably not going to be in focus very often, but
look at
the focus is going to be somewhere.
Yeah, but exactly. But it'll be watchable, And often, how perfect is the enemy of good? The one thing that I absolutely hate, Robin, is when I walk away from an interview and 5 minutes later I go, I should have asked that question. Yeah. That should never happen. If something came up and it's just an interesting detail in that might fill out the person's character or their backstory a little bit more, and you forget it, I always regret that. So I try never to leave those things just hanging in the air, where you just breeze past the subject or not ask a question that's completely obvious and that the audience really wants an answer to.
Or they pop up for you when it's too late and the subject is far gone, and then you can find some comfort in that nobody else would know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So as long as you never say it to anybody, you'll be okay.
I should have done this. Don't ever say that.
But that's the thing. Like, I played music for many years as well, and you'd play. You know, you might play a bum note here and there. You know, and you'd be beating yourself up. Like, nobody noticed. You know, get over yourself. Was the whole thing pretty good? Well, then, you know, this may not be 100% in focus. Did people enjoy it? I really hope so. You know, but so those things can be built on. Then, you know, as I say, perfect is the enemy of good in that situation.
So to round this off, where do you see yourself in the future? What stories are you focusing on now and how?
We've known each other for 20 years. If we're to sit here in 20 years' time, I would like to have spent the last 20 years...
I hope I have a bigger office.
Marty.
Or no office at all.
Exactly, yeah. We'll be up a mountain somewhere again doing this. I hope that I have been an independent creator who's trusted by viewers and readers and listeners who are prepared to pay for what you're doing because they trust you to bring them stories that matter to them. The stories that I want to tell, I'm moving more and more away from celebrity for celebrity's sake. It's the easiest thing in the world for me to go and interview a Conor McGregor or LeBron James, right? But again, is there any calories in that? Are they going to tell me something that nobody already knows about them? And the answer to that is probably not. So what I want to find is those unique stories that people have themselves and tell those stories instead, like Faraway Martin, this musician who's living down there, maybe not using a wide net, but just putting out one little hook and catching that one story that makes somebody feel something, that changes something in them or for them and gives them a different way of looking at things, hopefully in a more positive way, and the people recognize themselves in what they're doing. They say, yeah, that could be me too, because even in our stories of starting off working in an IT department together, and then you got to admit that we've achieved our wildest dreams with some of the things that we've done here, and the people maybe someday can sit back and look at us and go, Jesus, that wasn't a bad story they put together there either, was it?
Fantastic. And where can we find you on the internet?
Everywhere. So you will find me at Philip O'Connor on Twitter. Patreon.com/Arrowman in Stockholm will crop up there. You will find the Irish in Sweden podcast is on Instagram. The Global Gale podcast is on Instagram. But if you Google Philip O'Connor in Stockholm, there'll be endless amounts of content that turn up, and not least on Robin Danehav's fine YouTube channel. Pleasure as always.
Amazing. See you in 20 years.
Oh yeah, 20 years time we'll do the follow-up.
Hopefully before that.